This is a Black Nouveau digital presentation. We're continuing our conversation with Professor Kurt Dietrich, Professor of Music Emeritus and the author of Never Givin Up, the new biography of Al Jarreau. Professor, thank you so much for joining us here. First, my question to you is, what surprised you upon your research about this book, about Al or about anything that it took to put this piece of work together?
Well, like a lot of people, there was one era of Al's career that I kind of knew quite a bit about, and that was the early 80s when he was making those very great and popular records. But what I didn't know about him was that there were these sort of downturns in his career where he didn't record for 4 years, and then he didn't record for 6 years. And so this was just history that I did not know, and trying to follow that and why did that happen? How did that happen? Those were things that were really brand new to me.
What kind of inside track, though, did you have on learning about Al, being at Ripon, a professor there, and knowing that that was the college he attended?
Well, I had met Al several times here at Ripon College when he came back for visits. And those were brief meetings. And the one time I interviewed him, it was impossible because he was at a reunion, and every half a minute, somebody else would come up and say, "Hey, Al, remember me?" And so it was an interview that wasn't going to work too well, but it was great anyway. But so there was that connection, but also Ripon College for quite a while kept a little archive, an Al Jarreau archive. And from the old days, they had all these clippings from newspapers and from magazines and so forth. They had photographs and so forth. So that was a great place for me to start my research, was right there.
Absolutely. So from there, even before that, his family certainly had an impact on him. So just talk about the impact that his family had on his life and how it may have helped to craft his style and who he was as a person.
Well, he grew up in a very close-knit family. His father was a minister, a Seventh-day Adventist minister. However, by the time Al was really conscious of life around him, his father had left the church. But the family was religious nonetheless, even though his father didn't go to church anymore. His mother did every week and took Al to choir practice with her when he was just a tyke. And they were a very close-knit family, although his 4 older siblings were quite a bit older than he was, but he grew up then with his younger brother, Marshall, just 2 years. But this was a very closely knit group, and by all accounts, a model sort of family. You know, this is the kind of family you want to know and that you want to be close to. So there was that I'm sure grounded him in a way that you can't really replicate any other way.
You mentioned his parents. I know you mentioned his siblings and his older sisters, one of which is Rosemary. Talk about how important she was to Al and also in writing this book.
Well, to Al, she's not as important as she might have been. She was the next closest sibling to him, older than he, but she was 6 years older than he was. So she left home right after high school, and at that time, Al was only 12 years old. But still, she was around all of those 12 years and very close to him then. And I was told by Al's manager, who is still running his affairs, he said, if you want to write this book, you need to get permission from the head of the family, and that's Rosemary. And so I got in touch with Rosemary, and I met her. I actually met her very briefly once before, but we just kind of hit it off. And I have been speaking to her at least once a month on the telephone for the last 4 years. She has told me an incredible amount of information. She has given me a lot of feedback about so many things. She just has been amazing in this venture.
Professor, obviously you're a historian on jazz. You know a lot about it. So talk about Al Jarreau's place among jazz greats, or at least among the genre. What was his impact, and how did his style resonate to where jazz is where it is today?
Well, that's an interesting question because I'm not sure that he even belongs in the jazz category. People tried to put him in that for his whole career, and he certainly did belong in it. Even every night on a concert for a few pieces, he was a jazz singer, period. But when he first started recording, which wasn't until he was 35 years old, by the way, um, he had developed a style that owed a lot to jazz, but it was very idiosyncratic. And he did scat singing, which is obviously a part of what jazz singing is all about. Um, but he had his own take on it, and he imitated instruments, and he did things that other people did not do. And frankly, nobody really picked up on that. It was like too individual. There was no way that anybody could do Al Jarreau better than Al Jarreau did, or different, really. And so I think ultimately he, as in jazz, is sort of a footnote. I mean, a really important one and a really incredibly talented one. But he purposely, at various times in his career, essentially said, okay, I'm going to be a pop singer now. I'm going to be an R&B singer now. But he always sang with a jazz sensibility, no matter what music he was doing.
Now, you hear those influences of jazz, but also kind of that Minneapolis sound too a little bit, and certainly the pop and R&B feel too. So amongst all of that, what do we need to know about Al Jarreau based on your research?
Well, again, he just was an amazing singer, and he could sing in ways that other people could not. Um, I appreciate the fact that, like all pop singers, most of the music he sang, it was love songs. You know, that's just what singers sing. On the other hand, he did sing some songs that reflected his upbringing, especially on his first record when he sang about spirit and when he sang We Got By. It was a sort of veiled autobiographical song. He did some singing about social issues, but that wasn't a huge thing for him, but it was certainly something we should remember about him. But I just remember him as an incredible stylist. And the people who heard him live, which is thousands and thousands of people all over the world, I don't think anyone could have ever left one of his concerts without feeling better about themselves and maybe the world.
All right, Professor, thanks again for joining us here on Black Nouveau.
Well, thanks so much for having me.